Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Okay. Sometimes I have to adjust my microphone or it adjusts itself and doesn't let me know. So nice to see everyone today. I hope you're having a nice Sunday. Can't believe we're halfway through April already. It was about 82 degrees in Iowa yesterday, the day before, and now it's about 37. So we hit quite the temperature jump here today, which in alone can make you have a bad tone day. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be talking about here today are those rotten bad tone days that we all experience at one point or another in our lifetime as a flute player, right? In our daily lives. So let's talk about basically what they are and, why they occur. So bad tone days are basically like bad hair days, right? It's like when nothing is working, no matter what you do, what you're trying, nothing works. It's not how like you want it to be. It doesn't feel right. Doesn't look right. Nothing is right. So you just feel like you just can't get beyond that, right? It can be very distracting, frustrating, all of the above. So first of all, we need to think about like some of the physical reasons that bad tone days can be explained for, right? So, sometimes maybe you can eat something that's a little salty. Maybe you ate a bag of potato chips the day before, the salt and vinegar ones, the extra salty ones, or maybe you drank a margarita with and you got the salt on the glass, you could have just had some spicy food or something that just disturbed your mouth and made your lips swell up and get a little puffy. It could be hormonal changes, we have those. So things like that, that can affect your mouth getting swollen or your lips getting swollen. Maybe you have a canker sore or a cold sore on your lip or something. That can be like a killer for a flute player, right? If we get some kind of cold sore on our mouth. There are prescriptions for those, by the way. So if you're someone that gets plagued by cold sores, they just pop up anytime, you basically can get a medication for herpes and it will take care of that if you need it. So I can tell a story of my first professional audition was for the Los Angeles Philharmonic when I was still an undergraduate. And I was so excited about it. And I was on the plane and I looked in the mirror and I had a huge cold sore forming in the center of my bottom lip. And I didn't really get those very often, but somehow it chose that moment to get one. Now, by the time I got to the audition, there was almost nothing I could do to really make a good sound. That was like the ultimate bad tone day because I had a cold sore from the center of my like bottom lip all the way to the middle, inside my lips. So that was just like over and done with. So obviously, like, you don't want to have that happen to you if that's something that does happen to you, right? So like maybe having a prescription for that could be handy. I recommend it. Maybe it's not even that severe. Maybe you just have some like chapped lips or something. Maybe it's really dry. The weather changes, Sometimes you get that super irritating like little piece of skin on your lip, and then you start futzing with it, and then you bite it off, and then you bite your lip, and then that gets puffy, and then it gets worse and worse and worse, and you can kind of go down that rabbit hole and that cycle, and it gets worse and worse. Even things can happen like maybe you still have your wisdom teeth and maybe they grow in a little bit every once in a while, or they shift or something like that. That can cause changes in your mouth that can give you a headache, can make you feel not right, and the jaw, lots of different things. There's also like psychological things, right? So maybe the previous day's practice session, you thought you sounded amazing, and maybe you did, but maybe you come back to it like with that expectation in your mind that like this day is going to be like just as amazing, and then you're setting up that expectation, and if it's not quite right, then you can start, thinking all of these things are wrong that maybe aren't quite as bad as you might think. Also, maybe it's just not you. If you're having like several bad tone days in a row, you feel like you're just not getting sound like that you should be, bring your flute in to your flute tech. I had that issue last week or 2 weeks ago. I was like, man, my sound has been really bad for a few days for what I know my sound should be. And sure enough, I brought it into my flute tech, and my head cork needed to be replaced on my head joint, you know. So that happens too. If you know, especially if it's like not really a prettiness of the tone or a feeling here in the embouchure that you're feeling something is off, but you feel like you're trying to really make sound and sound is just not coming out of your instrument like it should, that's when you want to go in and have it checked. It could be definitely like leaks in the pads. It could be that. Could be like what I had that happens. You know, your head cork could be just need replacing. If you travel, you know, and you go to different climates, like I had just been in Brazil, then I went to Turkey, very different climates, coming back to Iowa, you know, and then, you know, things can happen. Your instrument can get out of the adjustment. So, you know, don't always assume that it's you. Don't assume that it's not either, but, you know, don't always assume that it's absolute you and your fault. So just want to make sure I've got that. Okay. Yeah. Acyclovir. Yeah, that's the, Tyler put it in the, yeah, that's the prescription. Yeah. Okay. Why we don't like those bad tone days? Well, our sound is like our signature, right? If it's like I said, it's like having a bad hair day or something. You know, you don't want to feel icky. You don't want to go out looking bad. You know, you don't like to do that. So it is kind of a vain thing when we don't like our sound when we're practicing, right? So we need to kind of know the difference between, is it just a bad day because of today, because of those reasons I mentioned? Or is there something really affecting my sound in a different way? Is it more of a long-term issue that needs work? If it is one of those days that just is not your day, then, well, we need to know what to do. So sometimes, you know, it's just not meant to be. And that's okay. And maybe the universe is telling you you need some other kind of nourishment that day, which could be taking a walk in nature. It could be going to have an ice cream cone. It could be, you know, spending time with people that you love. It could be going shopping. It could be a lot of different things. Maybe it's just listening to music, listening to some of your favorite pieces. Maybe it's going to a museum and getting other kinds of inspiration, you know. But you're not going to, if you take a day off of playing your instrument, probably it's going to do you good physically, because we need days off in that sense. And it's not going to completely, obviously, derail all of your progress that you've been making, right? So taking days off are okay. Sometimes we don't want to kind of practice the struggle and force our way through it if we know that it's just not going to work, especially if we can go, oh yeah, I ate that big bag of chips yesterday. That's why I'm all messed up and I think tomorrow's going to be fine. So cool, you know, you don't have to have an existential crisis about your sound like everything is terrible. You probably explain it away pretty easily, right? However, there are times where maybe we just really need to practice for whatever reason. Maybe we have a concert coming up, or there's a rehearsal that we have to go to, and we really need to prepare the music somehow, right? So then, yeah, we do need to know how to kind of power through those moments. Also, bad tone days can happen, right? On performance days, that's like the worst. Everyone hates that, but it can happen. It can happen at inopportune times, and you have to know how to deal with it. Again, real moments. I was recording an album with a harpist that I play with from Turkey, and he was here in January, and I accidentally bit my bottom lip on the inside of my lip, and I had to record my whole album with a huge canker sore on the inside of my bottom lip that just hurt like hell, basically. Thankfully, it didn't, like, you know, disturb the sound too much, other than, like, it hurt a lot when I was putting my flute here, and it was very annoying, and some things were not exactly where I would normally, like, rely on them, but I needed to know how to deal with that in that moment, because I couldn't go, oh, well, we'll just do it next week when my lip feels better, because harpist has to go back to Turkey, right? So sometimes we can't choose those moments, and we need to know how to get through them, right? One thing we have to realize is that our mouth is very close to our ears. So most of the uncomfortableness that we feel that manifests itself in the sound is much more audible to us than it would be to other people listening to us from a distance, which is usually the case if we're playing in a concert or something like that. So we have to start to understand also the difference between how it feels and how it sounds. Because sometimes how it feels makes us think that how it sounds is really bad. Like I said, I was not feeling real great here after I bit my lip and I had to put my flute there, but I had to kind of get outside of myself and listen in a different way and trust that it sounded okay. And thankfully, when I listened to the recording, it sounded okay, So sometimes just, again, that uncomfortable feeling that we have, and if there's some kind of funk with the lips, something's happening, a little swollen or chapped or something, we sense that because it's so close to our ear. But the actual volume of your tone, the physical volume of your tone, will probably take over a lot of that at a distance. What will be noticeable, however, is when the player feels uncomfortable and they kind of let that come across in their sound, when they start like kind of struggling even more, that can be kind of evident in the sound. So we have to kind of learn how to get a different perspective on that while we're playing. And if something feels bad, I feel like there's a problem here, we tend to go toward it. And I think we don't want to go toward it in terms of trying to fix it. We're trying to do that, but we want to go away from it, So it's like, how can I back away from the problem here and see if I can get some more space and sound around it? So that's something that when you're actually in the moment and you feel like something is not quite right, the more you kind of narrow your focus in on that small place and that location, then things will get more tense, right? More uncomfortable. So it's like you have to kind of open up your sort of horizon perspective so that place feels not so significant to you in that moment. So we'll talk about some like ways to, practice that as well. So in our practice sessions, when we're having those bad tone days, and if we just have to practice the music, to prepare for something, again, we might be focused on that vanity aspect of, I don't like my sound, and get very distracted. So you might not want to practice the music maybe with the kind of intent in mind that you're listening for your like most self-indulgent, beautiful interpretation or something like that. Maybe you just want to focus in on the rhythm, and just practice on one note and really just say, okay, I'm gonna have to like learn the rhythm, and then maybe you play the pitches, without thinking about sound quality, but just to like get the music down. It's okay. Whatever is happening probably would be resolved the next day. Sometimes, again, if you try too hard to like fix it, it makes a bigger problem and you just get frustrated and then you just lose your time anyway, right? So you can do things like that. Maybe you don't even need the flute, if it's not urgent, you can study the score, you can listen to a recording, you can do a lot of other things in your practice other than actually, physically playing. In terms of actually working on sound, say you really want to work on your sound and you really want to find other ways to keep a good, strong sound when you're not feeling it really well, there are several things that you can do. So first, I would say is find some kind of drone. I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to put on a drone for musical practice and meditation. Here, this is a B natural. It's basically like a cello and some other yoga-ish sounds around it. You can hear that. And I might actually start like super unfocused and even out of tune, like just kind of blowing air, and see if I can kind of work my way into the zone of the sound, you know, so like beginner flute tone, like blowing straight over, not trying to be in tune, just getting the air moving and connected to the instrument. The only thing I changed was I tilted my flute in towards me a little bit, you know, so I actually wasn't changing any way I was connecting to the instrument. I was just trying to find the zone and see if I could do that with repositioning the flute. Now I'm gonna move the lips only. I'm just gonna kind of move them a little bit more focused and a little bit more above. Somewhere in the middle. Now I'm gonna take the pressure on and off my chin a little bit. So I'm just kind of focusing on other ways to get in the zone of the tone without feeling like I'm trying to like correct that negative feedback that I'm getting, you know, by overblowing or over focusing. It's just basically listening and using a couple of basic parameters to kind of reposition things to see if you can get it to align better for you, because that's what you're really looking for when you're having those bad tone days. You want things to align and flow, right? So it's like, how can I find this like alignment? So I find like just putting a drone on and not starting with the expectation like that your sound is going to be perfect, but actually starting with a sound that is like actually really not good at all, but like purposefully, you know, like I said, just be straight up beginner flute tone. You can even like blow over a Coke bottle. You know, and then eventually I could find my way back to it. Sometimes when we know what it's not, like very clearly, it's a lot easier to find what it is. But sometimes when we have like such a specific idea of what we might want, like nothing else will be acceptable. It's kind of like when you go shopping and you're like, I want to find a t-shirt with a pocket on the back of the left shoulder, and the pocket has to have a heart on it, and then on the bottom right corner of the t-shirt there needs to be a circle with a feather, and like you're not gonna find that. Like it's not gonna happen, right? So sometimes we have such an ideal in our mind that nothing else becomes acceptable, you know. And I think this is one of the biggest struggles that we face, you know, especially if that you know what you want to sound like, right? But sometimes we have to kind of walk away from that a little bit to find how to come back to it in a more organic way, you know, in an easy way. And you know, the ears are really powerful. And if you have that idea of and you sound like, your ears will help you to find the way. But sometimes if you go looking immediately sort of for that needle in a haystack of possible sounds, that's where you will start to like fight and feel uncomfortable, and you might be creating a long-term problem that could feel like a bad tone day, like every day, you know, kind of thing. So I find that these kind of sound exploration warm-ups or whatever you want to call them are really helpful for that. You know, we have to be always be curious and open and thinking of practicing as like a discovery mission, and to understand what we're doing better, you know, not just like finding the right answer to the test every time, you know. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing you might do is you might take some kind of exercise, like maybe something from, let's see, Philippe Bernaud's book about the embouchure, the flexibility of embouchure, or Paul Edmund Davies has really good lyrical exercises, or many people have these kind of exercises like kind of vocalises. And you might just practice them with just like an airstream only, something like, not really trying to make a tone, but just kind of focusing on a constant air pressure. Because that's usually one of the biggest problems in terms of sound in the flute. And if you came to my previous session about sound as a noun versus a verb, what we were talking about before in terms of the vanity of the sound, the prettiness of the sound, all that stuff that would make it not sound pretty, right? That's the sound as a noun. That's the sound as a thing. But the sound as a verb in terms of how it connects to the instrument, that's going to be through the airstream, right? So if you're just kind of making this air sound only, you can really listen if there's a like a decrease in air pressure, for example, when you're going up over the top of a scale. I don't know, can you hear the air when I'm doing it? Okay, just making sure, because I don't know how it comes through the mic, but then you might add just like a little sound. Again, that's kind of sharp and unfocused, but that's what I'm kind of going for right now. Then I might go into like a real tone and see, is my airstream really strong in the right spot? So, you know, it doesn't really matter if it sounds like perfectly beautiful. You're checking something else, which is a really important part of your tone production, which is that solid airstream and connection to the flute. Other things I like to do to also get the readiness of the embouchure and the feeling of the embouchure are different kinds of target practice, because that's what really like the embouchure does, is like hone in the sound with the flute, right? So I find that kind of, some people might call them breath, you know, like tongueless attacks or something like that, breath attacks. I will say though, I'm not doing like a big thrust with the diaphragm, because you can't really do that anyway, it's involuntary muscle, but I'm not trying to like do a very, like a really strong ha or something. It's just literally without the tongue, you know, like something like that. And what I'm trying to check on there is my aperture creating a channel that is funneling the sound, my resonance that I'm creating with space inside of my chest, oral cavity, that kind of thing? Is my aperture creating a funnel that all of that sound goes in directly? What I mean by funnel is what I mean literal funnel, you know, like if you're pouring like water into a jug and you use a funnel that has a small channel and then it's open here, right? So like we have all of this big space that we need to put inside of a small space. So if your funnel kind of was loose at the bottom, you know, or had a piece missing or something, then your liquid or whatever is going to spill out of it, right? So we have to make sure that we're literally funneling all of that in a focused way. And sometimes doing it without the tongue, sometimes we find that focus with the articulation, but doing that to make sure that every time we articulate, we're also not doing this. which is loosening the embouchure up. Now, I work with my students with this all the time, and I'm saying, you're moving your lips, you're moving your lips. And they're like, I'm not. And I'm like, let's go to the mirror. And it's like, yes, you're moving your lips. Like, pretty much it's always the case that they think they're not moving their lips, and they're moving their lips. So, like, literally, it's kind of like if you were holding a pencil or a cigarette or whatever you want to hold between your lips. Cigarette's not recommended, but something like that. If you're holding it between your lips, that there's a seal there. You know, it's not tight. It's just firm. It's a firmness around a space. So you're checking that, and that's without the tongue, right? And if you notice, it's kind of maybe hard to see perfectly, but my lips are not moving and I'm not opening. If I were going to do, I want to do and let go every time, because every time I let go, there's a chance that I don't go back to the exact same spot. And I want to be sure that if I know where the spot is, that I'm not deferring from that spot. You have to kind of think of yourself like a sharpshooter, you know, like if you know where your target is, you have to stay trained on your target at all times. You can't be kind of like flailing around with the weapon, you know, and then like expect at the moment you need to, you know, aim that it's going to land in the right spot, right? You need to be kind of trained on that target. So that kind of target practice I find really helpful. Another kind of target practice is if you literally take your flute off your face but leave the embouchure in the same formation and come back. So it doesn't have to be your most beautiful sound, but it's landing and I'm making a sound, and I'm not like when I take the flute off my face, I'm not losing the whole structure again. And so when I put it back, you know, so it's kind of tricky, but I recommend it. You can also do it by continuing the air and doing and going back like that. It takes a good amount of air pressure to do it, but it's a good exercise, because I feel like one of our biggest problems actually with sound, you know, with our tone production, is just that we can stop making the sound so easily, or we can disconnect from the flute like so easily. So, and it sounds like the whole system is shutting off all the time, and it takes too much effort to turn back on. So if we're constantly losing that focus of where we are, that can also make us feel like we're not having a good sound day, right? Because it's like, where are we, right? We're losing that focus. So the more we really know where we are and we can locate that place and stay there, the less likely we are going to have like bad sound days, independently of those like, you know, funky external factors that might happen, like we already talked about, right? So I think that's super important as well. Now, are there any disadvantages to having like perfect sound days every day? Well, I actually think that there are, because if your sound, like, sometimes I have students who like have it like naturally just like a really good sound, and they almost never sound bad. It's just like their sound is really good. Sometimes those are the students that can be less flexible in some ways, because they haven't had to problem solve around certain issues in the sound. So if something isn't quite right, then they don't really know how to fix it, because they just kind of do what they do, and they haven't like thought about it very much. So that's the great thing about problems in general, is that problems are our biggest teachers. Problems are learning experiences. Like, we need to have problems in life, actually. this could be a topic for a whole other session, I think. But human beings are built to overcome problems, right? That's what we're literally built for. If you go back to ancient times and you think how humans built the pyramids, or they built all of these ancient structures and civilizations without electricity or without any of these like modern things, like that means that they solved certain problems, right? So if they can do that, then we can probably solve the problem of our flute sound, right? So, but we need to have problems so we know how to work through things, right? So I think in today's society, we try to set up our lives maybe too much to like avoid problems. And it's easy to do so because it's easy these days to kind of isolate yourself, right? Like even like having problems gives you confidence too, like, or overcoming problems, right? Gives you confidence. But because today things are very like convenience based or like self based, like if you go to Target and you don't have to go to the cashier, you can just go to the self checkout, right? And so like maybe you don't think to overcome that problem of just like communicating with another human being about something, right? Like something simple like that we don't even think of because it's just like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna go buy my M&Ms at Target or whatever. But problems are good to have sometimes. So when you have those issues with your sound, you can learn a lot because maybe you can start also going, okay, what is it? Well, if it is my lips and they're just feeling funky, is there a way that I can almost take the lips out of the equation? Do I rely on my lips too much for my sound production? Maybe I'm doing that. Maybe I'm not thinking enough about like the shape of the oral cavity, or maybe I'm not thinking enough about really the angle of how the sound comes up and enters the flute. Maybe I'm not thinking enough about the like resonant spaces. There's a lot of different things that you might not be thinking about, and you're only relying on like that feeling of the embouchure. So problem solving that and working through that is gonna make you have a better sound, right? And it's also gonna certainly make you a better teacher if you're gonna be teaching anyone. That's super important. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones that like actually had a lot of problems themselves that they had to work through, right? And had to find like different solutions. Sometimes this, again, when it comes really naturally to someone, sometimes they just kind of do it and they don't know like what to tell another person, to do it. It's like, well, just do it like this, right? And, not everyone is like that. And certainly we can't expect that with different kinds of people that one thing that's going to work for somebody is going to work for somebody else. So we as teachers, we certainly need to know how to problem solve and how to find, different solutions that work for different people. And that sometimes can be challenging if you haven't gone through it yourself. There are certain things that maybe even, my students that they might struggle with. And I might tell them directly, like, I literally can't relate to that because I never had that problem. I had a lot of other problems, but that problem, it was not something that I experienced. So I can't necessarily relate to what you're going through, but here's how I might go about it, And then there's other things, of course, you can relate to. Not everyone has the same kind of problems, right? But problem solving is always a good thing, and it's a really good learning tool and teacher in itself. So, be thankful sometimes for those bad tone days because it might teach you something. It might send you out to have an ice cream cone with a friend that you needed to see. It might, teach you to, oh, maybe I need to listen to this music a little bit more and actually get it in my system. It might teach you like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I was, not thinking about my tongue position while I was, trying to make a beautiful sound or something like that. It could teach you a lot of different things. So in some ways we have to be thankful for those hard moments. So I always like to ask for questions. it can be related to this or anything related to sound. So I just want to open it up for questions. You can either just throw out your question or like put it in the chat box. Um, but I would really like to hear from you guys in terms of questions, because I know everyone has different situations and things that they're maybe trying to overcome in that area. So we can chat about it. Anything that I didn't speak about that you want me to speak to, um, or situations you want advice about. Could be something else, not even related to what we're talking to is fine.
Hi. Okay, so I was typing, but I decided this
Sure,
is
no.
easier. So lately, tone color has been kind of a focus in my practice. I'm finding that sometimes I'll get just, the most incredible, what's the word I'm thinking of? I think yellow is the term Trevor Y uses, kind of tone, but then like I can't necessarily reproduce it in the low register, especially. How do you go about finding that again? The same sort of exercises or?
Yeah, I think, um, you know, I've mentioned this in some other talks
I'm
too.
sorry, can I interrupt you guys? Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry. I want to hear it again.
Oh, okay. So I've been working on tone color a lot lately, and I find that I have trouble, like I'll get a great sound and then I'll have trouble reproducing it, especially like in the low register. So just like how do you deal with that same kind of exercises or what?
Yeah, I think you need kind of a couple of kind of backup generators in your thinking, how you think about it. So we have to use like different kinds of like senses, like both like intuitive, analytical, things
Hmm.
like that. So um intuitively, like if you find that you just come up, you're trying stuff and you find the sound that you want, you might associate it with a certain like feeling, or you're saying yellow, and I know Trevor Y uses those colors and stuff. Yellow can mean sunshine, yellow can mean a flower, yellow can mean a lot of different things, right?
Right.
So
I don't know that I like the term yellow really.
no, no,
Maybe more
I know.
ethereal
I'm
is
just
what I'm
saying
going
that,
for.
like
But yeah.
I think we think of colors, but sometimes we do it in the kind of a sense of like it's the box of 8 Crayola crayons, and I think
Hmm.
we want the 64. We want that full box of like, yellow can mean a lot of stuff. Like if your eyes turn yellow, like that's not very pretty, right? Like if you have like jaundice or something, that's horrible. But like sunshine is beautiful and amazing. We love that, right? So like there's different kinds of like things that we can associate with different colors. So I always encourage people to be even more descriptive, like, in that, and then associate them with like certain feelings. And then as a human being, I think you can remember that association with a feeling rather than just like yellow. Okay. Like kind of a nondescript color in that sense. It's generally, what yellow is, but again, it could be lemon, sunshine, it could be many things. I would say be as specific with yourself as possible about that. Maybe even go like if you are feeling it's like a yellow mood. Well, okay, what kind of yellow? Like, is it? I'm thinking of like lemons, like citrus, bright, sunny day. Well, where am I? Am I in a sunny day in Spain, or am I like on a sunny day in the North Pole and like drinking lemonade? Like, what am I doing? Who am I? Am I a young girl, an old girl, a man, a woman? Whatever. You can be as specific as possible to kind of get inside that feeling that you're creating. That's the great thing about being a human
Off.
being. We have like a limitless imagination, and we can that like
Funny.
world that even that only we can understand, but that's all that we need to do
Something.
is understand it for ourselves, right? So um that's one thing I would say. Then I think we need to understand the physical part, and that's where we need to be analytical. So usually, like, we practice our sound exercises and all that stuff because we're supposed to, right? That's like I'm being a good boy and girl and practicing my long tones, and and we do them because we know we have to. And there's a certain aspect of just like the physical athleticism of doing them, and the muscles connecting to your instrument, and if that is important. But again, we need to practice not just to do, but to understand. So when you do find, you feel like, okay, I just found what I want, then you might even have like a little, like a little cheat sheet. Okay, like all the factors that go together, like in terms of sound production, right? Like resonance, shape of the oral cavity, like vowel shape, tongue position. That's all going to be kind of like about the oral cavity, like general like airspeed, like that kind of thing. And like see if you can like kind of take stock of all of those different variables, And then the next day when you go back, you kind of have to trace the steps rather than just try to go for the result again, because you have that expectation in your mind, right? And you want that, but like sometimes we kind of go like directly to what we think it is in our mind, but we don't like retrace the steps enough. Then we start getting frustrated, right? We're like, why don't I have it? I got it yesterday. And it's so annoying, right? So we've all been there. So it's kind of like going back through the process and like setting it up again. Then you start to like build trust with that in terms of knowing how to locate it. And then it becomes more part of your own intuitive process. So I would say going about it in a couple different ways. In a very intuitive way, because that's what human beings do when they learn. But then also being more analytical, tracing it back and kind of asking yourself, like, how are these factors coming together to create the result that I'm looking for?
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
Good. Okay, a couple other questions. Yeah, channeling of air, high versus low register. Yeah, if you have seen me teach before about sound, you'll know that I don't think the flute takes a whole lot of air actually, and I don't think it takes more air in the high register or less in the high or low. I think it's about the same air in every register basically. In terms of your connection to the flute is what will project the sound. I do think it's like different location of resonance, just when you're singing. Like there's still air that's projecting that out. It's just that you resonate in a different place when it's high versus low, versus much more open resonance. You're using your entire torso, you're resonating much lower, So my air in terms of how I'm connecting is the same. Once you make contact with the outside world with the air, you've made contact. So for me, it's not really about like channeling the air. It's about keeping the air like consistent, and then knowing like how you're using your resonance throughout your body. I think sometimes we think we have to use like more air sometimes, and then we maybe blow harder, and then we like block the sound here with our embouchure because the air has nowhere to go. Because again, once you've made contact with the outside world with the air, you can't make more. There's contact and then there's not. You just have to have a consistent contact in that sense. Yeah, I think that removing the flute, is really good, just to kind of, again, it helps you to find your focus and kind of how you're aligning things. It's like locking in. Drinking lemonade in the North Pole. I know I'm weird. Whatever it takes, that's the thing, like whatever it takes. It doesn't matter. Like be weird also in your practice sessions, like I mean, music is like a total reflection of life, right? And life is weird sometimes. So like it's good to be weird, Everything shouldn't be always perfect in your practice room. If it is, like you're not really doing something right, So gotta have a crazy imagination. I watched I credit watching a lot of soap operas growing up after school. They made me have kind of a wild imagination, I think, because they were so crazy. All right. Any other questions? Please feel free to just throw them out too if you'd like. Yeah, I think, what I made as the title, like turning your trash into treasure. What I wanted to say about that is that in the process of, like, if you're making a sound that it's not the one that you want for that specific moment, that sound might work really well in another moment, so you can kind of save it. You can be like, okay, I don't need you right now, just take a seat, hold on, we're going to bring you back at another moment in time. Maybe your sound is kind of like airy that day and you're like, what is up with that, like, why is it so airy? But maybe like later on you want to play some like piazzolla and want to get some like smoky tone or something like that, and you want a little air sound in this tone, or you still need to know how to use that and make it in tune. Was that a bad sound? No, I thought it was pretty good sound. I thought it was cool for the moment, right? Like, I'm not going to play like that on Prokofiev Sonata because that's going to sound not right for that moment, right? But so I don't really think that there's necessarily like a bad sound. There's only a sound that like works in that moment or not, and that's going to be not based on you and how you're feeling or even your lips or what you ate. That's really about like your knowledge of the music, the composer, the context, all of that. And being as sincere as you can be with it, right? In that understanding. I think that's the best sound that you can make is, that sincerity. But yeah, I think that the learning experience that you get from it is the biggest treasure that you can have if you really, learn how to work through it. Or have an ice cream cone, like I said. We did that on Tuesday, my whole class. It's that time of the semester. I was just feeling everyone. It finally got warm. Iowa in March is like so brown. Everything's like dead as a doornail, the grass. It's just a little depressing. Everyone's tired. It's cold. It finally got warm outside, and we were supposed to have etude class. It's at 6 p.m., It's like, who wants to have etude class at 6 p.m. on the first nice day of this? I was like, let's go to ice cream, everybody. So we just piled everyone in cars and went over and got some ice cream, and everyone loved it. And we said we were supposed to do a D major, and we got some vitamin D in the sunshine. So we thought, perfect. We accomplished what we needed to accomplish. Those moments are important too, I mean, you got to just be a person sometimes and not worry about everything. So let me just see, I have a comment here. Yeah, I feel day by day our ears become even more experienced and we catch things that literally no one else realizes. Yeah, that's also the downside of like getting better. Like, ignorance is no longer bliss. Because you start to hear better too, and you're like, oh God, I sound so bad. And it's not that you sound so bad, it's just that you realize that there's more possibilities for you to sound better. So like anything, like you said, you're catching things that are not what you maybe want, so that's where progress is not linear. We also can't expect, as human beings, that every day is like gonna be like better than the next, right? Like, that's just not how life rolls. And even if we've got everything set up to be like perfectly and we're in control of all of everything and make it perfect, well, there's a lot of things in life that are completely out of our control, right? And it might just steamroll all of your plans, something that's completely out of your control. So that happens sometimes, right? So even psychologically, we need to know how to like deal with that, get through that. But yeah, when you start getting better, normally your ability to understand what's going on and like what needs improvement goes up a little faster than your ability to do it. And then you start feeling like you're terrible because you have a better awareness of what you're doing, right? And then your ability to make it happen goes up again. And then you get in that like, I'm wonderful phase for a while, right? And then the scales start to tip again, and that other one goes up, and you're like, oh God, I'm bad again, and then goes up. So that happens, and we go through ebbs and flows. I know for me as a teacher, what happens to me sometimes is, as a teacher, sometimes you have to demonstrate so much, and if you're like kind of almost over demonstrating, like exaggerating because you really want the students to realize what you're doing, you start doing stuff yourself that you don't need to do because your playing is kind of where it needs to be. But like, because you're kind of like, over demonstrating to students, sometimes some of your own things get out of whack. So I know for myself, I have to kind of like even rein it in a little bit and be like, why are you doing that? You don't need to do that. Like you're trying to show someone else something there. So, I mean, I know that kind of happens to me. So, we all have to kind of have our, centering devices that kind of bring us back to like what we know that we need or what we want, and sometimes we just also get away from that for a variety of factors, whether it be teaching or, your circumstances that you play in. Maybe you play in a band, some kind of band, and they play really loud all the time, so you feel like you have to like force your sound or something like that, and you might have to kind of rein it back in. That happens too. So yeah, a lot of different variety of factors. Yeah. Okay, how to fix the sound while doing an audition. Yeah, with nervousness. Yep. So this, I think nerves are always going to be a factor in some way or another to people, even if you don't really get nervous too much. Everyone has experienced it, right? I think it's really important that we know what those physical things are, I know for me, like, in general in life, I don't like to feel like when my body is not how it's supposed to be. Like last week I had a headache the whole week, and I never have headaches. And it was making me really anxious because it's like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Why do I have a headache for a week? It's probably just the weather or whatever, changing. But like, I know things like that make me anxious because it's like, I don't know what's going on. I don't like that, right? So for me, when I play, I'm not nervous about the circumstances. Like, I'm not afraid I'm going to make a mistake. I'm not afraid of any of that. But sometimes I do get afraid that my sound is not going to be like I want it to be. And that makes me nuts. And so I actually do, for that reason, sometimes take a half a tablet of Inderal. Inderal, like beta blocker. Because I know that if I feel something off with my body, I'm going to start getting really anxious. So I remove it with that, That's not for everybody, but that works for me, because it is just a physical thing that's bothersome. And then if it's not there, I'm cool as a cucumber. I'm comfortable, don't feel a bit anxious about anything, not worried about the music, about making mistakes. I almost never worry about like note mistakes or anything like that. For me, it's just like, is my sound going to be right, So there's that option. Again, I don't say you have to do that, but it is something maybe to consider or try. You can also simulate the experience, right? You can do jumping jacks or run around the room a few times and get your heart rate up, and maybe then like stand on a chair and like just like where all these like kind of physical difficulties, and see if you can kind of focus in and concentrate on the sound. And focus in, again, it's like finding that center, not just kind of how it feels right here, right? So finding your center in the sound that will kind of be like it's almost like a wall against the nerves that want to shake you, right? So making sure that you really have a steadiness against the disturbance, basically. So like physically, like simulating the nerves in some way, I think is really, really helpful. What I was saying earlier is that oftentimes too, in like an audition or something, like the room can be unfriendly acoustically, right? It can be very dry. I remember once I was doing an audition behind a screen, and they literally put us like behind a velvet curtain, and like the curtain was like 1 inch in front of my face, you know, and it was just like completely absorbing any sound that was coming out. It was just felt so bad, right? So I find that for me, as soon as I stop fighting that space in front of me and I just kind of lean back and I think of like spreading my sound more like side to side, like a pool of water, like expanding, and I think of the space behind me, everything kind of opens up and just becomes more steady. So it's just changing your perspective. And that can be kind of hard to do sometimes in the moment when you're trying to concentrate, especially that's the thing that kind of sucks about orchestra auditions, right? Because like you don't get very much time on stage and you got to find that comfort real fast. And just usually when you're starting to kind of figure things out acoustically and be comfortable, they're like, thank you. Right? It's like all done. It's kind of awful, right? So it's tricky, but that's part of our process. And then of course not all auditions are like that. You might have other ones you can play for a longer amount of time, but yeah, we kind of have to be like really quick, like sleuth, like FBI agents or something, kind of figuring out like, okay, oh, it's dry, okay, and I need to do this. So that's why I like practicing in various acoustic circumstances and different lighting. I think that's really important too. I'm really sensitive to light sometimes. That's why I'm wearing my blue light glass. What do you call these things? They're not real glass. They're just, for the reflecting of the screen. So I get sensitive to that sometimes. So sometimes light like really throws me off and I feel really weird about that. So again, practicing in uncomfortable spaces too. Like we got to practice sometimes feeling physically uncomfortable. Because like you said, in an audition, if you've never practiced how to deal with that, it's just going to derail you. So that's why we should kind of like those problems sometimes and be thankful for them, so we learn how to work through them so that when it does happen on stage, it might not feel good still, but we can still stand up there and kind of do what we need to do in the best way possible. Yeah. Great. Any last questions or comments? Yep. Great. Sounds good, everyone. Well, I hope, like I said, if you're having a bad tone day, have some ice cream handy. It always helps. All right. So I look forward to seeing you at the next one, hopefully. And it'll be next month sometime. And if you guys who do attend these, if you have some ideas too that you want me to talk about or topics, I'm really open to that. So you can always shoot me a message like on social media or email or something like that. And I'm certainly willing to entertain that. So feel free to do that anytime. Okay? All right, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm just gonna...
Oh, I was talking and then